President, I ask unanimous consent first that Ken Kern, a fellow in my office, be granted 4 privileges during the consideration of the Congressional Review Act resolution.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I thank all of my colleagues who have worked with me on these resolutions to really stop the EPA's destructive new regulations, such as the new source performance standards. They're truly unrealistic and unreasonable and threaten our security and prosperity. I've always said that, we're all entitled to our opinion and our views. We're just not entitled to our own facts. And as I go through this presentation, I'll show you that the facts will not be able to give us the energy that we're needing if we go down this destructive path. The CRA resolution that I have introduced with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell will disapprove and stop the EPA's rule for emissions from new coal-fired power plants. I want to thank my colleague from West Virginia, Senator Capito, and the senator from North Dakota, Senator Heitkamp, for joining me in this fight by introducing a separate resolution to disapprove the EPA's rule for emissions from existing coal-fired power plants. It's time for Congress to step in and stop these rules from harming not only hardworking West Virginians, but the American consumer. I am pleased these measures are being brought to the floor for a vote today. Never before, Mr. President, has the federal government forced an industry to do something that is technologically impossible until now. I've always said that if a regulation is unobtainable, it is unreasonable. And that is the fact we have in front of us. The EPA has based its final rule for new coal-fired power plants in the United States largely off of a still developing power plant unit in Canada, which is called the Boundary Dam CCS project. The EPA asserted in the final rule that the Boundary Dam facility has been operating full carbon capture sequestration successfully at a commercial scale since October 2014. Mr. President, that is found to be totally untrue. Canadian press reports have recently disclosed that the Boundary Dam project has failed to operate successfully at full CCS for any meaningful period of time. The reports also identified the CCS system of the demonstration plant as being a key issue in the delays for getting the plant up and running. After 1 year of operation, the project was forced to replace certain important features at a cost of $60 million. There have also been nearly $23 million in non-performance penalties and lost revenues. The plant's management company, which is Sask Power, has acknowledged these recent reports and are now pushing back the project's operational date to the end of 2016. But there are no guarantees that this will prove true either. Sask Power is also claiming that the project will need at least a year of stable operation to prove the technical operation and the economics of the project, which would aid in determining commercial viability. Sask Power has announced that it will not be able to make an informed decision about carbon capture sequestration until 2018. Yet, the EPA here in the United States of America is demanding that all U.S. coal-fired generation industry implement this technology now. And that's what I've said all along. If it's not obtainable, which it's not been, we have not spent the money trying to develop this technology, and it hasn't worked, shouldn't we at least make sure it works before we force a complete overhaul of the system or people to meet standards that are unobtainable? These recent revelations prove that CCS is still technologically unproven and potentially economically damaging in a power plant application. And therefore, it is foolish for this administration to require it now for the new U.S. coal plants. Last week, I wrote a letter to Administrator McCarthy about these reports because forcing coal to meet standards when experts know that the required technology is not adequately demonstrated on a commercial scale makes absolutely no sense at all. Instead, I believe that the EPA should scrap this impossible-to-meet rule or amend it to require advanced technology that has actually been implemented, would offer improved environmental performance, and is commercially viable. For the administration, this rule is more about desirability rather than feasibility, with little regard for the rising consumer prices, the effects on jobs, and the impact on the reliability of our electric grid. This administration thinks the country can do without coal. I simply tell you this, Mr. President, they are in total denial. They might not like it. They might not want it, but it is built into the plan for the next 20 to 30 years. They have flat out ignored their own data that says that coal will produce more than 30% of our electricity through 2040. It is completely contradictory that the EPA continues to impose unreasonable and unattainable rules in an attempt to regulate coal into extinction. The people who suffer are hardworking West Virginians and consumers across this great country. If these regulations go into effect, no new coal plants could begin new operations. More Americans would lose their jobs and economic uncertainty would grow. The nation's coal-fired power plants currently have an average age of 45 years. The average age of all coal plants in America today, which produces close to 40% of our power, has an average age of 45 years. Many will need to be replaced in the near future, and regulations that prohibit building new coal-fired power plants can soon become a serious issue for the nation's electricity grid and the reliability that we all depend upon. Although the Energy Information Administration, the EIA within the Department of Energy, still projects 37% of electricity generation will come from coal in 2040. I remind you, this administration, who's putting rules that are unobtainable and unreasonable, is saying that they're still going to need 37% of the electricity this country will need by 2040 from coal. The currently operating plants, without new additions, will average 65 years of age by that time. If nothing's done, you have these plants that are averaging 65 years of age to produce the type of power this country needs. The history of coal plant operations already tells us that coal plants at that age will not achieve the levels of hours of reliable operation required to meet the 2040 forecast. The coal industry must be allowed to add the new coal-fired power plant additions, such as the ultra-supercritical, which we know is technology that works. We know it works. But this is not the direction they're going. They're putting something that's unobtainable in place. That's why we need to block this plan, the Clean Coal Power Plan, or the Clean Power Plan that the President has brought before us, because it cannot be obtained and we are going to be in a deficit. There is no doubt this President's energy agenda has already had a crushing impact on my state of West Virginia and other energy states around the country. But you have to say enough is enough. In West Virginia, we want clean air and we want clean water. We're doing everything humanly possible. We've cleaned up the environment more in the last 2 decades than ever before. And if you look around the world, there's more coal being burnt than's ever been burnt before. The United States burns less than 1 billion tons of coal a year. Over 7 billion tons of coal are being burnt elsewhere in the world. 4 billion tons just in one country of China. And I venture to say that nobody is meeting the standards that we're required to here for the technology that's going to be needed to be obtained. I will continue to explore all available options to prevent these unattainable regulations from impacting the state of West Virginia and the U.S. But I would ask our President, I would ask this administration to work with us to find the technology, to develop the technology that would allow us to use a product that we have abundance of in this country, which is coal, in the cleanest of fashion. And then we could export that technology around the world to clean up the global environment, to help the overall environment of the globe. But right now, Congress needs to move forward to stop these rules, Mr. President, further crippling our energy production, jeopardizing our energy grid, and putting our workers out of good-paying jobs. I urge all of my colleagues to support these resolutions that are put forward today when we vote. And I want to thank you, and I notice the absence of a quorum, Mr. President. Huh?
You withhold your quorum, your call for.
Oh, okay. I would move my call for quorum.
Under the previous order, the Senate stands in recess until 2:15.